The dust kicked up beneath Eleanor Winchester's heels as she stumbled forward, the jeers of Silverdale's townsfolk ringing in her ears. Her honey blonde hair fell in tangles around her tear-streaked face as the sheriff's deputies roughly escorted her to the edge of town. Behind her, Finnegan Sutton watched from astride his dappled gray stallion, his hands tightening around the reins until his knuckles turned white, rage building inside him like a thunderstorm. The year was 1877, and justice in the Montana Territory cared little for truth when rumors and suspicion took hold. "Don't you ever show your face in Silverdale again, Miss Winchester," Sheriff Holt bellowed, his weathered face contorted with disgust. "Thieving from the bank that feeds this town, why, you're lucky we're not stringing you up." Willow shook her head desperately, her voice breaking. "I didn't take that money. Mr. Blackstone is lying." "I've never—" "Save your breath, girl," Deputy Marston sneered, giving her a harsh shove that sent her sprawling to the ground. "Evidence don't lie. Your handkerchief found with the missing money speaks plain enough." From his position at the edge of the gathering crowd, Finn could bear it no longer. He'd known Willow since she'd arrived in Silverdale 2 years prior to work as the schoolteacher. Quiet, kind, and unfailingly honest, the accusation against her was as absurd as claiming the sky was green. He spurred his horse forward, cutting through the jeering onlookers. "That's enough." His voice carried across the gathering, silencing the crowd momentarily. "You're condemning an innocent woman without a proper trial." Sheriff Holt turned, his hand instinctively moving toward his holstered Colt. "Stay out of this, Sutton. This ain't your business. The bank's money was found in her boarding house, wrapped in her own handkerchief." "Convenient," Finn spat, dismounting and striding forward. His tall frame and broad shoulders, honed from years of ranch work, cast an imposing figure. Especially when Blackstone's been looking to get rid of her since she rejected his advances last month. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Gregory Blackstone, the bank owner and wealthiest man in Silverdale, stepped forward from among the onlookers, his expensive suit out of place among the dusty townsfolk. "That's slander, Sutton," Blackstone said coldly. "The woman is a thief, plain and simple. $200 missing and found under her floorboards. The evidence is irrefutable." Willow struggled to her feet, dignity somehow intact despite her torn dress and the dirt streaking her face. "I've been framed. I would never steal." Silence. Sheriff Holt barked, raising his hand threateningly. "The decision's been made. You're banished from Silverdale. If you're seen within town limits again, you'll face imprisonment or worse." Finn stepped closer to Willow, positioning himself between her and the lawman. The breeze carried the scent of wildflowers from her hair, mixed with the dust and tears. He'd admired her from afar for months, watching her teach the town's children with patience and grace. Their occasional conversations at church socials or when passing on the street had been the highlights of his weeks. If that's how Silverdale treats the innocent, then perhaps it's not a town worth staying in, Finn declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. Blackstone laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. "Careful, Sutton. Your ranch is profitable, but you're not above the law. Stand with her, and you'll find yourself unwelcome as well." Finn's jaw tightened as he looked around at the faces he'd known for years, neighbors he'd helped during harsh winters, families whose children he'd taught to ride. Now they stared at him with suspicion, so quick to believe the worst of Willow without question. He turned to the disheveled schoolteacher, her green eyes shimmering with tears yet still burning with defiance. In that moment, his decision was made. "I'll fetch your things from the boarding house," he said quietly to her, then turned to the crowd. "If honesty and justice mean nothing in Silverdale anymore, then I want no part of it." Sheriff Holt stepped forward. "You're making a mistake, Sutton. Think of your ranch, your reputation." "My reputation depends on standing for what's right," Finn replied, helping Willow onto his horse before swinging up behind her. He addressed the crowd once more, his voice carrying across the dusty Main Street. "You're banishing her without a fair hearing, on the word of a man whose character is far more questionable than hers has ever been." Blackstone's face darkened with rage. "Sheriff, I want him arrested for interfering with justice." The sheriff hesitated, looking between Blackstone and Finn. Many of the townsfolk shuffled uncomfortably, doubt beginning to seep into their expressions. "You can't arrest a man for speaking the truth," Finn said. "But if you're determined to drive Willow Winchester from town, then know this." He looked directly at the sheriff and then at Blackstone, his voice unwavering. "Then I'll be banished too." A collective gasp went through the crowd as Finn turned his horse, one arm protectively around Willow's waist. She sat rigid with shock, hardly believing what was happening. "Finn," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't do this. Your ranch, your life, hush now," he murmured against her hair. "We're riding out of here and then we'll figure things out." Louder, he called back to the sheriff. "I'll be back for my belongings and to make arrangements for my property. Unless you plan to steal that from me too." Without waiting for a response, he urged his horse forward, leaving the stunned crowd behind. As they reached the edge of town, the jeers had faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. Willow's shoulders shook with silent sobs as the reality of her situation crashed down upon her. "I didn't take that money," she said through tears. "I swear it on my life, Finn." "I know," he replied simply, his gaze fixed on the open country ahead. "I've never doubted you for a second. But why would you give up everything for me?" she asked, turning slightly to look at his face. Finn's blue eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Because some things matter more than land or money. Truth matters, justice matters." He paused, his voice softening. "And you matter, Willow." The vast Montana landscape stretched before them, painted in golds and greens beneath the afternoon sun. Behind them lay everything familiar, ahead nothing but uncertainty. Yet as they rode toward the unknown, something like hope began to blossom in Willow's chest. She wasn't alone. "Where will we go?" she asked, wiping away her tears. Finn's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "I have a friend with a place about 20 miles east. We'll head there first and make a plan." He hesitated before adding, "I promise you, Willow will clear your name, whatever it takes." She nodded, finding strength in his certainty. As Silverdale disappeared behind them, Willow allowed herself to lean back against Finn's solid chest, drawing comfort from his unwavering presence. The journey ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since the deputies had dragged her from her small room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, she felt a flicker of hope. The sun dipped lower in the sky as they rode eastward, two outcasts against the world, connected by injustice, and something deeper neither was ready to name. By the time twilight painted the sky in purples and deep blues, Willow's body ached from the long ride. Though Finn had stopped twice to let them stretch their legs and drink from his canteen, the emotional and physical toll of the day had left her exhausted. The steady rhythm of the horse beneath them and Finn's solid presence behind her were the only constants in a world that had shattered around her. "We'll need to make camp soon," Finn said, his breath warm against her ear. "There's a creek about a mile ahead with good shelter." "We can rest there for the night." Willow nodded, too tired to speak. The gravity of their situation weighed heavily on her. Just this morning, she had been preparing lessons for her students. Now she was a banished woman with nothing but the clothes on her back. They reached the creek as the last light faded from the sky. Finn helped her down from the horse, his hands gentle at her waist. For a moment they stood close, her hands on his shoulders, his on her waist, the air between them charged with unspoken words. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching. "I don't know what I would have done if—" "Don't think on that," he interrupted softly. "You're safe now." He set about making camp with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, he had gathered wood and started a small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across his strong features. Willow watched him, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. She had always known Finnegan Sutton was a handsome man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly when it grew too long, as it did now. His blue eyes, startling against his sun-bronzed skin, reflected thoughtfulness and intelligence that many missed beneath his quiet demeanor. "Why did you believe me?" she asked suddenly as he returned from tending to his horse. Everyone else was so quick to think the worst. Finn sat beside her on a fallen log, the firelight illuminating his face as he considered her question. "I've watched you with those children, teaching with such care and patience. I've seen you give your last dollar to the Miller family when their youngest was sick." He looked at her directly. "A person doesn't change their nature overnight. You're not a thief, Willow." Tears welled in her eyes again, but she blinked them away, determined to be strong. "Blackstone set me up because I wouldn't," she faltered, shame coloring her cheeks. "Because you wouldn't accept his advances," Finn finished for her, a muscle working in his jaw. "I figured as much. The man's used to getting what he wants. He asked me to dinner 3 times. When I declined the 3rd invitation, he suggested other arrangements, said a school teacher's salary couldn't afford much comfort, but he could provide for me." She shuddered at the memory. "When I refused, he said I'd regret it. I never thought he'd go this far." Finn's hands clenched into fists. "That yellow-bellied snake. We'll expose him, Willow, I promise you that." "How?" she asked, the enormity of their situation crashing down on her. "It's his word against mine, and he owns half the businesses in town. No one will stand against him. Someone planted that money in your handkerchief. Someone who works for Blackstone, most likely. We find them, convince them to talk." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks floating upward into the night sky. "And I've known Sheriff Holt for years. He's not a bad man, just too easily influenced by power and money. Given the right evidence, he'll do the right thing." Willow wished she could share his confidence. She hugged her arms around herself, suddenly aware of the chill in the night air. Without a word, Finn stood and went to his saddlebags, retrieving a worn but clean blanket that he wrapped around her shoulders. His fingers brushed against her neck as he settled it in place, sending an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the blanket or the fire. "You should eat something," he said, reaching for the provisions he'd packed. "It's not much jerky and hardtack, but it'll keep your strength up." "I'm not hungry," she replied, though her stomach betrayed her with a quiet growl. He smiled, the expression softening his features. "Eat anyway. Tomorrow will be a long day." They ate in companionable silence, the sounds of the night surrounding them, crickets chirping, the soft rushing of the creek, an occasional hoot of an owl. Under different circumstances, it might have been peaceful. "Tell me about your friend," Willow said eventually. "The one we're going to see." "Thomas Whitaker. We served together in the war union side. He's a good man. Married a local woman named Sarah, and they have a small ranch east of here. It's modest, but they'll give us shelter while we figure out our next move. Do you think they'll believe me about the money?" Finn met her gaze across the fire. "Tom knows a thing or two about being falsely accused. He'll understand." Curiosity flickered across her face, but she didn't press for details. Everyone carried secrets from the war. Some wounds were best left undisturbed. As the fire burned down to embers, Finn set up a bedroll for her and another for himself on the opposite side of the fire. "Try to get some sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch for a while." Exhaustion overcame her as soon as she lay down, but before sleep claimed her completely, she watched Finn sitting by the fire, his profile strong against the darkness, a silent guardian between her and the world that had turned against her. For the first time since being dragged from her room that morning, Willow felt truly safe. "Finn," she murmured, already half asleep, "why did you really do it? Risk everything for me?" There was a long pause, and she thought perhaps he hadn't heard her, or that she'd already fallen asleep and dreamed the question. But then his voice came, quiet and sincere in the darkness. "Some things are worth fighting for, Willow. Some people too." With those words echoing in her mind, she drifted into a dreamless sleep. Morning came with a gentle hand on her shoulder, and Finn's voice calling her name. Willow blinked awake, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly, wincing at her stiff muscles. "I let you sleep as long as I could," Finn said, already kneeling by a small morning fire where coffee brewed in a battered pot. "But we should be moving soon. Drink this, it'll help." He handed her a tin cup of black coffee, the aroma rich and inviting. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Willow felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger or fear. She sipped the strong brew gratefully, using the moment to gather her composure. In the clear morning light, she could see the toll the night had taken on Finn. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and a day's growth of beard roughened his jaw. He had clearly stayed awake most of the night, keeping watch. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. He shrugged. "Enough." I'm used to long nights on the ranch during calving season. They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and the last of Finn's hardtack before breaking camp. As Finn saddled the horse, Willow washed her face in the creek, the cold water reviving her spirits somewhat. She did her best to tidy her appearance, combing her fingers through her tangled hair and brushing dust from her blue calico dress. "It's about 10 more miles to Tom's place," Finn said as he helped her mount. "We should be there by midday." The morning was pleasant, with a gentle breeze tempering the heat of the sun. Under different circumstances, Willow might have enjoyed the ride through the rolling Montana countryside, with its waving grasses and wildflowers. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow even in early summer. They rode mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Occasionally, Finn would point out a hawk circling overhead or a herd of pronghorn in the distance, small attempts to distract her from their predicament. Around mid-morning, as they crested a small rise, Finn suddenly tensed behind her, his arm tightening around her waist. "What is it?" she asked, alarmed by his sudden vigilance. "Riders," he said tersely. Coming from the direction of Silverdale, Willow's heart pounded as she squinted against the sun. In the distance, she could make out 3 riders moving at a steady pace toward them. "Could be anyone," she said hopefully. "Travelers, maybe." Finn shook his head. "They're following our trail. That's Holt and his deputies." His voice was grim as he urged his horse off the trail and toward a stand of cottonwoods near a bend in the creek. "We need to move faster." They pushed hard for the next hour, keeping to the tree line when possible, crossing the creek several times to break their trail. Finn's horse was strong but tiring under the weight of 2 riders and their hurried pace. "We can't outrun them," Willow said finally, feeling the animal's labored breathing beneath them. "Not like this." Finn's jaw tightened as he scanned the horizon. "You're right, and we're still a fair distance from Tom's place." He made a quick decision. "There's an abandoned trapper's cabin about a mile east of here. We'll hole up there until dark, then continue on foot if necessary." They found the cabin nestled against a rocky hillside, nearly hidden by pines and overgrowth. It was little more than a one-room shack with a sagging roof and broken windows, but the walls were solid, and it offered shelter from prying eyes. Finn led his horse to a small clearing behind the cabin, removing the saddle to give the tired animal rest. Willow ventured inside, coughing at the dust that rose from the floorboards with each step. A crude table, a single chair, and a rusted iron bed frame with no mattress were the only furnishings. "It's not much," Finn said, following her inside, "but it'll do until nightfall." "Do you think they'll find us?" Willow asked, peering through a gap in the shuttered window. "Not likely. I took precautions to hide our trail." He moved beside her, his shoulder brushing hers as he checked the approach to the cabin. "Besides, they'll expect us to keep moving toward Tom's place. This detour should throw them off." They settled in to wait, sitting side by side against the wall furthest from the door. The cabin was cool and dim, a relief from the midday sun. Finn offered her the last of their water, but Willow shook her head. "Save it. You need it more than I do after staying awake all night." He smiled faintly. "Always thinking of others. That's one of the things I've admired about you since you came to Silverdale." His words warmed her more than they should have. "You've been watching me." She asked, a hint of teasing in her voice despite their situation. Finn looked momentarily embarrassed, a faint color rising beneath his tan. "Not in an improper way," he clarified quickly. "It's just, you made an impression. The way you stood up to the town council when they wanted to exclude the Ramirez children from school. How you stayed late to help Johnny Mills learn to read when everyone else had given up on him." Willow felt a blush creeping up her own cheeks. "I didn't know anyone noticed those things." "I noticed," he said simply. A comfortable silence fell between them. Outside, a woodpecker tapped rhythmically on a nearby tree, and sunshine filtered through the cracks in the walls, creating narrow beams of light in the dusty air. "Tell me about your ranch," Willow said after a while. "I've heard it's one of the finest in the territory." Pride and sadness mingled in Finn's expression. "It was my father's dream. He brought our family west from Pennsylvania when I was just a boy. Worked himself to death building it up, but he loved every minute." He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. After the war, I came back and took over. 5,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, good water rights, fertile valley land. And you just left it all, she whispered, the weight of his sacrifice hitting her anew. For me. For what's right, he corrected, though his eyes told a different story. Besides, I haven't abandoned it completely. My foreman, Jacob, is capable. Once we clear your name, I'll go back. His confidence both heartened and worried her. And if we can't, if Blackstone's influence is too strong. Finn turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense. Then we'll start fresh somewhere else. Montana's a big territory, and there's Colorado, Wyoming, Oregon beyond that. The world doesn't end at Silverdale's boundaries. But your home, buildings can be rebuilt, land can be bought. But a good name, once lost, is harder to recover. He reached out hesitantly, then took her hand in his. I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy yours, Willow. The touch of his calloused palm against her sent a tremor through her body. For a breathless moment, she thought he might lean closer, but a sound outside snapped them both to alertness. Finn was on his feet in an instant, moving silently to the window. Riders, he whispered, 3 of them moving slow, looking for signs. Willow's heart hammered as she joined him, careful to stay hidden. Through the narrow gap, she could see Sheriff Holt and his 2 deputies scanning the ground, their horses walking at a measured pace along the creek bed. They found our trail, she breathed. They're guessing, Finn replied. The creek confused them, but they're checking the likely routes. He pulled his revolver from its holster, checking that it was fully loaded. Stay low and quiet. With luck, they'll move on. But luck wasn't with them. Deputy Marston, the younger and more eager of Holt's men, spotted something that caught his attention, perhaps a broken branch or a hoofprint they had missed. He called to the others, pointing in the direction of the cabin. They're coming this way, Willow whispered, fear clutching at her throat. Finn's expression hardened as he made a quick decision. Out the back. Now. They slipped through the rear of the cabin where boards had rotted away, leaving a gap just large enough to squeeze through. Crouching low, they made their way to where Finn's horse grazed in the small clearing. No time for the saddle, Finn muttered, quickly bridling the animal. He helped Willow mount, then swung up behind her. Hold tight. They set off at a gallop through the trees, moving away from the cabin and the approaching lawmen. For several minutes, Willow thought they might have escaped undetected, but then a shout rang out behind them, followed by the thunder of pursuing hooves. They've spotted us, Willow cried, clinging to the horse's mane as Finn urged it to greater speed. We'll lose them in the ravine ahead, he called over the rush of wind. They plunged down a steep embankment toward a narrow gully where a spring-fed stream had cut through the rocky soil. Finn guided his horse with expert skill through the treacherous terrain, while behind them, the lawmen's mounts balked at the dangerous descent. That'll slow them down, Finn said grimly as they reached the bottom and splashed across the shallow water, but not for long. They followed the ravine for nearly a mile before climbing out on the far side, emerging onto a grassy plateau dotted with stands of aspen. Ahead, the land rose toward foothills that marked the beginning of the mountain range. Tom's place is beyond those hills, Finn said, pointing. If we can reach it before nightfall, we'll have sanctuary of sorts. His horse was tiring rapidly now, its flanks heaving with exertion. Finn patted its neck encouragingly but knew they couldn't maintain this pace much longer. A rifle shot cracked through the air, the bullet whining past them to thud into a tree trunk ahead. They're shooting at us, Willow gasped, ducking instinctively. Warning shots, Finn replied, though his voice was tight with tension. They want us to stop, not kill us. At least he hoped that was true. Sheriff Holt was generally a reasonable man, but Deputy Marston had a reputation for impetuousness. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Finn made a split-second decision, veering toward a dense copse of trees that offered better cover. As they reached the shelter of the pines, he slowed the horse to a walk, listening intently. I don't hear them, Willow said after a moment. They're still coming, Finn assured her, but they'll be cautious now, especially in this terrain. They picked their way carefully through the trees, alert for any sound of pursuit. The forest grew denser as they climbed higher into the foothills, the going slower but the cover better. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horse through particularly difficult stretches. By late afternoon, they had gained significant ground, the forest opening occasionally to reveal stunning vistas of the valley behind them. There was no sign of the lawmen, though Finn remained vigilant, frequently stopping to listen and check their back trail. "We should reach Tom's place before dark," he said as they paused to rest the horse and drink from a clear mountain stream. "Another hour, maybe two." Willow sank down on a fallen log, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. The events of the past 2 days had taken their toll on her physically and emotionally. Her dress was torn in several places, her hands scratched from branches, and dirt smudged her face. Yet to Finn, she had never looked more beautiful, her spirit unbroken despite everything she'd endured. He sat beside her, offering silent support as she gathered her strength. "Do you really think we can clear my name?" she asked softly, voicing the doubt that had been growing since their flight began. "Blackstone is powerful, connected. Even if we find who planted the money, they might be too afraid to testify against him." Finn considered her question carefully, unwilling to offer false hope. "It won't be easy," he admitted, "but Blackstone isn't invincible. Men like him make enemies, and they get careless when they think they're untouchable." He took her hand gently. "We'll find a way, Willow, I promise you that." She looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face, her green eyes searching his. "Why do I believe you when you say that?" A small, wry smile touched her lips. "I barely know you, yet here I am, putting my faith and future in your hands. Maybe your instincts are good," he replied with a half-smile of his own. "Or maybe you're just desperate." Her laugh, though brief, was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Perhaps a bit of both." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings. Finn found himself leaning closer, drawn by something he couldn't resist. Willow's breath caught as she tilted her face up to his, her eyes fluttering closed. The crack of a branch breaking nearby shattered the moment. They sprang apart as Finn's hand went to his revolver, his body tensing as he scanned the surrounding forest. A figure emerged from the trees, not one of the lawmen, but a boy of about 16, dressed in worn clothes and carrying a rifle almost as tall as himself. He stared at them with suspicious eyes. "You're on Whitaker land," the boy announced, keeping his rifle pointed in their general direction, though not directly at them. "State your business." Relief flooded through Finn. "We're looking for Thomas Whitaker. I'm Finnegan Sutton, a friend from his army days. This is Miss Willow Winchester." The boy's stance relaxed slightly, though he kept a wary eye on them. "Pa's mentioned you, said you fought at Gettysburg together." Finn nodded. "That's right. Is your father at home? We need his help." "He's at the house." The boy jerked his head in the direction they'd been traveling. "About a mile that way. I'm Samuel, by the way." "Pleased to meet you, Samuel," Willow said, summoning a warm smile despite her exhaustion. "You have a fine way of approaching strangers, very authoritative." The compliment made the boy stand a little straighter, a hint of pride creeping into his expression. "Been keeping watch since Pa spotted riders coming from town this morning. Said they looked like trouble." "They are trouble," Finn confirmed, "and they might be following us." "Can you take us to your father?" Samuel nodded, lowering his rifle completely. "Follow me. I know a quicker way than the main trail." They followed the boy through the forest, leading Finn's tired horse along a narrow path that wound between trees and over rocky outcroppings. True to his word, within half an hour they emerged from the tree line to see a modest homestead nestled in a small valley, a sturdy log house. A barn, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. A tall man with graying hair was chopping wood in the yard. He looked up at their approach, shading his eyes against the setting sun. Recognition dawned on his weathered face, followed by concern as he took in their disheveled appearance. "Finnegan Sutton," he called, setting aside his axe. "What trouble brings you to my doorstep, looking like you've been dragged through hell backwards?" Finn dismounted, helping Willow down before clasping his old friend's hand. "The worst kind, Tom, the kind that involves Gregory Blackstone and a pack of lies." Thomas Whitaker's expression darkened at the mention of Blackstone's name. "That explains the lawman asking questions in these parts this morning." His gaze shifted to Willow, his manner softening. "You must be the schoolteacher they're hunting. Said you stole from Blackstone's bank." Willow lifted her chin, meeting his eyes directly. I've been falsely accused, Mr. Whittaker. I've never stolen anything in my life. Tom studied her for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw. I believe you, Miss Winchester. Blackstone's reputation reaches even this far from town. He gestured toward the house. Come inside. Sarah's got stew on the stove, and you both look like you could use a hot meal and some rest. As they approached the house, a woman appeared in the doorway, small and dark-haired, with a kind face lined by sun and smiles. She took in the situation at a glance, immediately ushering Willow inside with motherly concern. Land sakes, you poor thing. Let's get you cleaned up and into something fresh. She turned to her husband. Tom, heat water for a bath. Samuel, fetch my blue dress from the trunk. It might be a bit short, but it'll do until we can wash and mend this young lady's clothes. The simple kindness brought fresh tears to Willow's eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Whittaker. I don't know how to repay such generosity. Sarah Whittaker waved away her thanks. No need for that. Any friend of Finn's is welcome here. She shot a knowing look at Finn that made him shift uncomfortably. Besides, I know something about being judged unfairly. While Sarah tended to Willow, Tom and Finn settled at the kitchen table with cups of strong coffee. Finn recounted the events in Silverdale, explaining Blackstone's vendetta and their flight from town. Not surprised, Tom said when he'd finished. Blackstone's always been a snake, tried to foreclose on 3 farms last winter when folks were struggling after that bad harvest. He took a thoughtful sip of his coffee, but framing the schoolteacher for theft, that's bold, even for him. He wanted her, Finn said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. When she refused him, he decided to destroy her. And you rode to her rescue, Tom observed, a hint of amusement in his eyes despite the seriousness of the situation. Always did have a knight in shining armor streak in you, Sutton. Finn looked down at his coffee, uncomfortable with his friend's perception. I couldn't just stand by, it wasn't right. No, it wasn't, Tom agreed, his expression growing serious. But now you're both fugitives, and Holt and his men are sniffing around these parts looking for you. What's your plan? Clear her name, Finn said firmly. Find whoever planted that money in her room and get them to confess Blackstone put them up to it. Tom leaned back in his chair, considering. Won't be easy. Blackstone has half the town in his pocket and the other half too scared to cross him. But not everyone, Finn insisted. Mrs. Holloway at the boarding house always thought highly of Willow. Doc Perkins too, and Reverend Clark isn't one to be bullied, even by Blackstone. Maybe, Tom conceded, but you'll need more than character witnesses. You'll need proof. Their conversation was interrupted by the return of the women. Willow had bathed and changed into Sarah's blue dress, which was indeed a bit short but otherwise fit well enough. Her damp hair was neatly braided, and the dirt and exhaustion had been washed from her face. She looked refreshed, though still pale with worry. Sit and eat, both of you, Sarah instructed, ladling thick beef stew into bowls. You can continue your plotting after you've had a proper meal. The food was simple but delicious, and Finn realized he was ravenous. They ate in relative silence, the comfort of warm food and safety momentarily overriding their concerns. Samuel joined them, his youthful curiosity evident in the glances he kept shooting at their visitors. After dinner, as Sarah cleared the dishes, Tom leaned forward, his expression grave. You can stay tonight, get some proper rest, but you should know Sheriff Holt and his deputies stopped at the Henderson place about 3 miles west of here this afternoon. They'll likely be making the rounds of all the homesteads in the area by tomorrow. Willow's face fell at the news. We've brought danger to your door. Perhaps we should move on tonight. Nonsense, Sarah interjected firmly. You'll stay in the root cellar if Holt comes calling. It's well hidden, and he'd have no cause to search it. We'll need to think beyond tomorrow, Finn said. We need to get back to Silverdale somehow, find out who planted that money. Might not need to go all the way to Silverdale, Tom mused, stroking his beard thoughtfully. The Jenkins boys are working at Blackstone's lumber mill. They stop by here every few weeks on their way to visit their mother in Riverbend. Good lads, trustworthy. They might know something or be willing to ask around. Hope flickered in Willow's eyes. When are they due to visit next? Should be this weekend if they keep to their usual schedule, Sarah replied, rejoining them at the table. 3, 4 days from now. That's a start, Finn said, nodding gratefully to his friends, and it gives us time to rest and plan our next move. As night fell, sleeping arrangements were made. Willow would share a room with the Whittakers' 14-year-old daughter Emma, who had been helping at a neighbor's farm and would return the next day. Finn would bunk with Samuel in the loft. Before retiring, Finn stepped outside to check on his horse and get a breath of fresh air. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the black sky. He stood on the porch, listening to the familiar sounds of a ranch settling for the night, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft whicker of horses in the barn, the rustle of wind through the trees. "It's peaceful here," Willow said softly, appearing beside him. She had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "It is," he agreed, surprised but pleased by her company. "Reminds me of my own place in some ways." She studied his profile in the moonlight. "You must miss it." "I do," he admitted, "but I don't regret leaving." Willow moved closer, her shoulder brushing his arm. "Why did you really do it, Finn? Stand up for me, leave everything behind, and don't say it was just about justice or doing what's right." He turned to face her, close enough now to see the silver moonlight reflected in her green eyes. For a long moment he said nothing, gathering his courage. "I've watched you from afar for 2 years, Willow," he finally said, his voice low and earnest. "Seen your kindness, your strength, your grace under pressure. I admired you from the first day you arrived in Silverdale, but I never found the right moment to speak what was in my heart." He smiled ruefully. "I'm not much for words at the best of times." "You're doing fine now," she whispered, her eyes never leaving his. "When I saw them dragging you through town, heard those cruel accusations." His jaw tightened at the memory. "Something broke loose inside me. I couldn't bear to see you hurt, to see your good name tarnished. I had to act, consequences be damned." Willow reached up, her fingers lightly touching his cheek. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me." Finn caught her hand in his, pressing it more firmly against his face before turning to place a gentle kiss on her palm. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." The confession hung between them, charged with emotion. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Finn leaned down. Their lips met in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened, years of unspoken longing finding expression at last. When they finally parted, both breathless, Willow rested her forehead against his chest, her hands clinging to his shirt. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small against the vastness of their uncertain future. Finn wrapped his arms around her, drawing her close as if to shelter her from all harm. "We fight to clear your name, and when we do," he tilted her chin up to meet her eyes, "I'd very much like to court you properly, Willow Winchester, if you'll have me." Her smile, radiant even in the dim moonlight, was answer enough, but she rose on tiptoe to kiss him once more, sealing the promise between them. "I think I'd like that very much, Finnegan Sutton," she whispered against his lips. For that moment, with the stars shining overhead and Willow safe in his arms, the future seemed less daunting. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The next 3 days at the Whittaker Ranch passed in a strange mixture of tension and tranquility. Finn helped Tom with the daily chores, mending fences, tending livestock, and repairing an old wagon. The physical labor was a welcome distraction, allowing him to work through his anxieties about their situation while feeling useful to the family that had taken them in. Willow quickly endeared herself to the entire household, particularly to Emma, the Whittakers' quiet, bookish daughter who had returned from the neighboring farm the day after their arrival. She helped Sarah with cooking and household tasks, and in the evenings, she entertained the family with readings from the few books in the Whittakers' modest collection, her expressive voice bringing the stories alive. Each night, Finn and Willow found moments to be alone together, usually on the porch after the others had gone to bed. They talked of their pasts, their dreams, and their fears for the future, each conversation deepening the connection between them. Occasionally, Sheriff Holt and his deputies were spotted in the distance, checking nearby homesteads, but they had not yet approached the Whittaker place directly. On the morning of the 4th day, Tom returned from checking his eastern boundary with news that sent a ripple of excitement through the house. Spotted the Jenkins boys on the road from the mill, he announced as he stomped mud from his boots at the door. They should be here by noon. Finn exchanged a meaningful glance with Willow across the breakfast table. This could be their first real opportunity to gather information about Blackstone and possibly identify who had planted the money in Willow's room. Are they trustworthy? Willow asked, nervousness evident in her voice. They won't report us to the sheriff. The Jenkins family has no love for Blackstone, Sarah assured her, refilling coffee cups around the table. Their father lost his farm to the bank 5 years ago. The boys only work at the mill because jobs are scarce, but they're good lads at heart. True to Tom's prediction, just after midday, 2 young men rode into the yard on tired horses. Luke and Matthew Jenkins were brothers in their early 20s, with the same sandy hair and lanky build. They greeted the Whittakers warmly, before being introduced to Finn and Willow, showing only mild surprise at meeting the pair whose description had been circulated throughout the county. After a hearty lunch prepared by Sarah and Willow, Tom suggested the men take their coffee to the barn to discuss some business. Once they were settled on hay bales with steaming cups, Finn explained the situation in detail, from Blackstone's unwanted advances toward Willow to the planted money and their subsequent flight. The Jenkins brothers listened intently, occasionally exchanging glances that suggested they found the story all too believable. Blackstone's been in a right state since you two left town, Luke, the elder brother, confirmed when Finn had finished. Offering a reward for information, pressuring Holt to search every homestead within 30 miles. He seems mighty concerned about recovering that money, Matthew added, considering he's the wealthiest man in 3 counties. It's not about the money, Finn said grimly. It's about his pride. Willow rejected him, and now I've defied him publicly. He won't let either slight go unpunished. Luke nodded slowly. Sounds like the man. He fired old Jim Harris last month just for suggesting the mill workers deserved a half-day off for Independence Day celebrations. What we need, Tom interjected, is to find out who planted that money in Miss Winchester's room. Someone Blackstone trusts enough to do his dirty work. The brothers exchanged another look, this one more meaningful. You know something, Finn said, leaning forward eagerly. What is it? Matthew shifted uncomfortably. It's just talk, mind you, nothing we can prove. Tell us anyway, Tom urged. Sometimes talk has a grain of truth. Well, Luke began hesitantly, there's this feller works as Blackstone's personal assistant Elias Pinkerton. Skinny man, always dressed neat as a pin. He does all manner of special tasks for Blackstone. Like delivering messages that Blackstone doesn't want written down, Matthew elaborated, or visiting borrowers who are late with payments before the official foreclosure notices go out. The night before Miss Winchester was accused, Luke continued, lowering his voice as if afraid of being overheard even in the secluded barn, Pinkerton was drinking at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Got uncharacteristically loose-lipped after a few whiskeys. Overheard him bragging to Clem Russell about a special assignment from Blackstone that would teach someone a lesson about refusing the boss. Finn's pulse quickened. Did he mention Willow specifically? Matthew shook his head. Not by name. But he did say something about how even respected ladies weren't above Blackstone's reach if they crossed him. Hope surged through Finn. This was the first real lead they'd had a potential witness to Blackstone's plot. We need to talk to this Pinkerton, he said, already formulating plans in his mind. Won't be easy, Luke warned. He's Blackstone's shadow most days, and since your escape, the boss has kept him even closer. But, Matthew added with a sly grin, he still visits the Silver Dollar most Saturday nights, has a weakness for cards and whiskey. Tomorrow's Saturday, Tom noted, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Finn's mind raced with possibilities. If I could get into town unnoticed, perhaps I could corner him at the saloon, get him to talk. Too risky, Tom countered immediately. You're a wanted man, Finn. The moment you set foot in Silverdale, someone would recognize you. I could go, Luke offered unexpectedly. Pinkerton knows me from the mill, but we're not exactly friends. I could get him drinking, maybe steer the conversation toward Miss Winchester's case. Finn hesitated, reluctant to involve the young man in their troubles. It could be dangerous if Blackstone suspects anything. Luke squared his shoulders. Pa always taught us to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Besides, he added with a grim smile, I've got no love for Blackstone after what he did to our family. After further discussion, a plan began to take shape. Luke would return to town the following evening, ostensibly to purchase supplies before continuing to Riverbend. He would seek out Pinkerton at the Silver Dollar, get him talking, and try to extract a confession or at least information that could help clear Willow's name. If I can get him to admit anything useful, Luke said, I'll ride straight back here with the news. Should be able to make it by Sunday afternoon, Monday morning at the latest. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was the best option they had. As the men returned to the house, Finn pulled Luke aside for a private word. I can't thank you enough for this, he said earnestly. You're risking a lot for people you barely know. Luke's expression was solemn. My pa lost everything to Blackstone, his farm, his dignity, eventually his will to live. He drank himself to death within a year of the foreclosure. His eyes hardened with resolve. If I can help bring that man down a peg, I'll count it as a service to pa's memory. Finn clasped the younger man's shoulder, a gesture of respect and gratitude that needed no further words. That evening, after explaining the plan to Willow and Sarah, a tense anticipation settled over the household. Luke and Matthew would depart at first light, with Luke continuing alone to Silverdale while Matthew took a detour to Riverbend to explain the delay to their mother. As darkness fell, Finn and Willow found themselves once again on the porch, drawn together by the mixture of hope and anxiety the day's developments had stirred in them both. It's a good plan, Willow said softly, as if trying to convince herself as much as him. Luke seems capable. He is, Finn agreed, though concern lined his brow. I just wish it didn't involve risking someone else in our fight. Willow leaned against the porch railing, gazing up at the star-filled sky. I've been thinking about what happens after if we succeed in clearing my name. When Finn corrected gently, moving to stand beside her. When we clear your name, she smiled at his unwavering confidence. When then, will you really go back to Silverdale after everything that's happened? It was a question Finn had been pondering himself. My ranch is there, he said slowly. Everything my father built, everything I've worked for, but he trailed off, uncertainty in his voice for the first time since they'd fled town. But, she prompted, but perhaps a fresh start wouldn't be so bad. He turned to look at her directly, moonlight silvering her features. What about you? Would you want to go back, resume teaching at the school? Willow was quiet for a long moment, considering. I love teaching, she finally said. Those children mean the world to me. But I don't know if I could ever feel truly welcome in Silverdale again, not after the way they were so quick to believe the worst of me. There are other schools, Finn suggested, taking her hand in his. Other towns that would be fortunate to have a teacher of your caliber. There are other ranches too, she countered, squeezing his fingers. Perhaps not as established as yours, but land where you could build something new. The possibility hung between them, a fresh start together, away from the painful memories of Silverdale. It was both frightening and exhilarating to contemplate. Wherever we end up, Finn said softly, drawing her into his arms, as long as we're together, I'll consider myself fortunate. Willow tilted her face up to his, her eyes shining with emotion. When did you become such a romantic, Finnegan Sutton? His laugh was low and warm against her hair. I suppose you bring it out in me, Willow Winchester. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepening with the promise of a shared future still uncertain in its details, but increasingly certain in its togetherness. The following morning dawned clear and cool, with the scent of pine carried on the breeze from the surrounding hills. Luke and Matthew Jenkins prepared to depart after a hearty breakfast, their horses saddled and ready in the yard. Remember, Finn instructed Luke one final time, don't push too hard. If Pinkerton gets suspicious, back off. Your safety comes first. The young man nodded, adjusting his hat against the morning sun. I understand, I'll be careful, but I'll get what we need if it's possible. Godspeed, boys, Tom said, clapping each brother on the shoulder. And Luke, watch yourself in town. Blackstone has eyes everywhere. With final waves and promises to return as soon as possible, the Jenkins brothers rode out, their figures gradually diminishing as they followed the winding trail down toward the main road. The day stretched long for those left behind. Finn threw himself into ranch work alongside Tom and Samuel, while Willow helped Sarah and Emma with household chores and preparations for the coming week. The physical activity helped distract them from the anxious waiting, but as evening approached, tension began to mount once more. "Luke won't reach town until after dark," Tom reminded them as they gathered for supper. "And even then, it might take hours to get Pinkerton talking. We won't hear anything until tomorrow at the earliest." Despite the logic of his words, sleep came fitfully to everyone that night. Finn found himself repeatedly waking, straining to hear any sound that might indicate a rider approaching. By morning, dark circles shadowed his eyes, matched by similar signs of restless night on Willow's face when they met at the breakfast table. Sunday passed with agonizing slowness. The Whitacres attended their small local church, leaving Finn and Willow behind for safety, with Samuel posted as lookout on the ridge above the ranch. They used the time to discuss contingency plans, what they would do if Luke returned with useful information, or conversely, if his mission failed. "We could try to get a message to Mrs. Holloway," Willow suggested as they sat at the kitchen table, mugs of coffee growing cold between them. "She knows everyone who comes and goes at the boarding house. If anyone saw something suspicious the night before I was accused, she might have heard about it." Finn nodded thoughtfully. "It's worth considering. The Jenkins brothers might be willing to deliver a message if we're careful about how it's worded." They continued strategizing through the afternoon, pausing only when the Whitacres returned from church with news that the sheriff and his deputies had been asking questions at the service, though they hadn't specifically inquired about the Whitaker ranch. "It's only a matter of time before they come here," Tom warned. "We should prepare the root cellar just in case." Monday morning arrived with still no sign of Luke. By midday, concern had settled heavily over the household. "He should have been back by now," Matthew fretted, pacing the porch while scanning the road for any sign of his brother. "Even if he stayed in town overnight, he should have started back at dawn." "Could be he's following Pinkerton," Tom suggested, though his furrowed brow betrayed his own worry. "Or maybe he got useful information and is being extra cautious about returning." By late afternoon, when the shadows were lengthening across the valley, Samuel's shout from his lookout position sent everyone rushing to the yard. "Rider coming, fast." Hearts pounding, they watched as a horse and rider appeared on the distant trail, moving at a gallop toward the ranch. As the figure drew closer, they could make out Luke's distinctive sandy hair and blue shirt. "Something's wrong," Matthew muttered, noting his brother's reckless pace. "He's pushing that horse too hard." Luke thundered into the yard, reining his lathered mount to a sliding stop. His face was flushed, his expression urgent as he dismounted. "Sheriff's coming," he gasped, winded from his hard ride. "Holt and both deputies, there may be an hour behind me." A flurry of activity erupted at this news. Sarah immediately began gathering food and blankets for the root cellar, while Tom and Samuel rushed to hide any evidence of extra guests. "Did you find out anything about Pinkerton?" Finn asked urgently, helping Luke unsaddle his exhausted horse. The young man nodded grimly. "Got him drinking all right. Took most of the night, but he eventually started bragging about his special assignments for Blackstone." He glanced at Willow, who had joined them in the barn. "He admitted to planting the money, Miss Winchester. Said Blackstone gave him the cash and one of your handkerchiefs apparently taken from the schoolhouse when you weren't there." Hope and vindication surged through Willow. "He confessed. Would he be willing to testify to that?" Luke's expression darkened. "That's where things went sideways. One of Blackstone's mill foremen overheard us talking. Next thing I know, Holt's deputies are looking for me at my boarding house this morning. I barely got out of town ahead of them." "They must suspect you're helping us," Finn concluded, his mind racing. "Which means they'll be searching here thoroughly." "The root cellar won't be enough," Tom agreed, joining them after sending Samuel to keep watch on the approaching lawman. "They'll tear this place apart looking for you too." Willow's face paled. "We've put your family in danger. We should leave, draw them away from here." No time, Tom said, shaking his head. They're too close already. You'd never make it to the trees before they spotted you. He thought for a moment, then snapped his fingers. The old mine shaft, it's perfect. Mine shaft, Finn questioned. About half a mile west, hidden in a stand of pines, Tom explained quickly. It was abandoned years ago when the vein played out. The entrance is overgrown now, but there's a small chamber just inside that's still stable. You could hide there until the search moves on. It was their best option. Within minutes, Tom was leading Finn and Willow through the forest at a brisk pace, while back at the ranch, the others prepared to receive the sheriff with carefully rehearsed stories. The mine entrance was indeed well concealed, nearly invisible behind a tangle of brush and young pines. Tom cleared just enough space for them to slip through, revealing a dark opening in the rocky hillside. "Stay in the front chamber," he warned, handing Finn a small lantern and matches. "Don't go deeper, some of the tunnels aren't stable. There's a small spring just inside for water, and Sarah packed enough food for a couple of days." He clasped Finn's arm. "I'll come for you when it's safe." With hurried thanks and a promise to remain hidden, Finn and Willow ducked into the mine. The entrance tunnel was low, requiring them to stoop, but it quickly opened into a modest chamber perhaps 15 feet across, with a ceiling high enough to stand comfortably. The air was cool but not damp, and as promised, a small spring trickled from one wall into a natural stone basin. Finn lit the lantern, its warm glow revealing rough-hewn walls marked with old pick strikes and the occasional timber support. He spread the blanket Sarah had provided on a relatively flat section of floor, then arranged their small supply of food and water within easy reach. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," he remarked with a wry smile, trying to lighten the mood, "but it should keep us safe until Holt gives up his search." Willow sank down onto the blanket, weariness evident in every line of her body. The constant tension, the flight from town, the uncertain future, all of it seemed to crash down upon her at once. "What if he doesn't give up?" she asked in a small voice. "What if we're never able to clear my name? Are we going to spend our lives hiding in mines and root cellars, always looking over our shoulders?" Finn settled beside her, setting the lantern where its light created a comforting pool of illumination around them. "Luke got Pinkerton to confess. That's more than we had yesterday. It's a start." "A confession overheard by one person, who's now also a fugitive," Willow pointed out. "Hardly enough to convince a judge or turn public opinion." "Then we'll find more evidence," Finn said firmly, taking her hand in his. "Now that we know for certain it was Pinkerton, we can focus our efforts. Perhaps Mrs. Holloway saw him entering your room, or maybe someone at the bank noticed irregularities in the accounts that would prove the money Blackstone claimed was stolen never actually existed." His determination brought a faint smile to her lips. "You really don't give up, do you?" "Not when something matters," he replied, squeezing her fingers gently. "And you matter to me, Willow, more than I can say." She leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "When I was a little girl," she said softly, "my father used to say that truth and justice always prevail in the end. I'm not sure I believe that anymore. Not when men like Blackstone have so much power." "Your father wasn't entirely wrong," Finn mused, "but sometimes truth needs a helping hand. Sometimes justice needs people willing to fight for it, even when it seems hopeless." "People like you," she whispered, looking up at him with eyes shining in the lantern light. "People like us," he corrected, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're the strongest person I know, Willow Winchester. Most would have broken under what you've endured, but not you. You faced it all with courage and dignity." She laughed softly, gesturing at their stone surroundings. "Yes, hiding in a mine is the very picture of dignity." "It is when you're hiding for the right reasons," he insisted. "When you refuse to let lies and corruption win without a fight." Their conversation was interrupted by a distant sound, voices carrying through the forest, the neighing of horses. Sheriff Holt and his men had arrived at the Whitaker Ranch. Finn extinguished the lantern immediately, plunging them into darkness. They sat in tense silence, straining to hear, though the sounds were too far away to make out specific words. "Tom won't betray us," Finn whispered, his arm tightening around Willow's shoulders. "And there's no reason for them to search this far from the house. They remained motionless in the darkness, minutes stretching like hours. Gradually, the distant sounds faded, suggesting the search had either moved on or remained concentrated around the ranch buildings. After what felt like an eternity, Finn risked relighting the lantern, turning the flame to its lowest setting. The warm glow revealed Willow's tense features, her eyes wide in the dim light. "We should try to rest," he suggested, arranging the second blanket Sarah had provided. It could be a long wait. Though neither expected to sleep, exhaustion eventually overcame anxiety. Willow drifted off first, her head pillowed on Finn's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. Despite the hard ground and their precarious situation, there was comfort in their closeness, in the simple sound of each other's heartbeats and steady breathing. Finn remained awake longer, his mind turning over possibilities and plans. Luke's information about Pinkerton was crucial, their first solid evidence of Blackstone's plot. But without Pinkerton's public confession or some other compelling proof, it might not be enough to clear Willow's name. His thoughts were interrupted by a subtle change in the quality of light seeping through the mine entrance. Day had passed into evening while they rested, still no sign of Tom or any indication that it was safe to leave their hiding place. Willow stirred against him, awakening slowly. "How long was I asleep?" she murmured, her voice thick with fatigue. "A few hours," Finn replied, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "It's getting dark outside." She sat up, wincing at stiff muscles from their uncomfortable bed. No word from Tom. Finn shook his head. Not yet. Holt's men must still be searching the area. They shared a simple meal from their provisions: bread, cheese, and dried apple slices, washing it down with the cool, clear water from the spring. As they ate, they spoke quietly of lighter things, memories of better days in Silverdale, stories from Finn's ranch, Willow's experiences teaching in various frontier towns before settling in Montana. "I never expected to stay in Silverdale as long as I did," she admitted. "I've usually moved on after a year or so, but something about the place felt right, at least until recently." "What made you become a teacher?" Finn asked, genuinely curious about the path that had led her to this life. A soft smile touched her lips. "My mother was a teacher. I grew up surrounded by books and learning. After she died when I was 16, I promised myself I'd continue her work." She traced a pattern in the dust beside the blanket. Education was everything to her. She believed it was the key to a better future, especially for girls and women. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Finn said. "Just like her daughter." Willow blushed at the compliment. "What about you? Did you always want to be a rancher like your father?" Finn considered the question. "Not always. As a boy, I had notions of becoming a lawyer or maybe a doctor. But the war changed everything." His expression grew distant, remembering. "After what I saw at Gettysburg and Antietam, all I wanted was peace and open spaces. When I came home, the ranch was struggling. My father had died, and my younger brother was too inexperienced to manage it alone. So I stayed, learned the business, eventually bought my brother's share when he decided to move to California." "Do you regret it, not pursuing those other dreams?" He shook his head firmly. "No, the ranch became my dream. Building something, watching it grow and thrive, there's a satisfaction in that I never found anywhere else." He met her eyes in the lantern light. "Until now." The moment was broken by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the mine entrance, not the careful tread of Tom Whitaker, but the determined strides of multiple men. Finn extinguished the lantern immediately, pulling Willow deeper into the shadows at the back of the chamber. His hand went to his revolver as twigs snapped just outside the concealed entrance. "I'm telling you, there's nothing here but an old played-out mine," came Tom's voice, strained and slightly too loud a warning. "Not worth your time, Sheriff." "We'll determine that," replied a gruff voice that could only belong to Sheriff Holt. Deputy Marston tracked sign leading this direction. Broken branches, disturbed ground. Willow's fingers dug into Finn's arm as they pressed themselves against the rocky wall, scarcely daring to breathe. The brush at the entrance rustled as someone pushed it aside. "Mighty overgrown," came a third voice, Deputy Marston, presumably. "But someone's been through here recent. See how that branch is broken fresh?" "Light a torch," Holt ordered. "We're checking inside." Finn's mind raced. The front chamber offered no hiding places. If the lawman entered with light, discovery was inevitable. His hand tightened on his revolver, though he had no desire to shoot men who were, technically, just doing their job. He leaned close to Willow's ear. "If they find us," he whispered, his breath barely stirring the air, "run deeper into the mine. There are other tunnels. I'll hold them off." She shook her head vehemently, clutching his arm tighter. "Not without you," she breathed back. Outside, the glow of a torch appeared at the entrance. Shadows danced as someone prepared to duck into the low opening. "Wait," Tom's voice came again, urgently. "You don't understand, this mine isn't stable. The last time anyone went in there, a section collapsed, nearly killed 2 men. That's why I've kept it blocked off." There was a pause, then Holt's skeptical reply. "Looks like someone's been in there recently, Whitaker. These branches didn't move themselves." "That was me," Tom said quickly. "I check it periodically to make sure no wild animals have taken up residence too close to my livestock. Went in just yesterday, in fact, nearly got myself buried when some rocks shifted." Inside the chamber, Finn and Willow held their breath. Tom's lie might save them if the sheriff believed it. "Marston, what do you think?" Holt asked after a long moment. "Tracks could be Whitaker's," the deputy admitted reluctantly. "Hard to tell in this light." Another tense silence followed. Finn could almost feel the sheriff weighing his options, his suspicion battling with caution. "All right, Whitaker," Holt finally said. "We'll leave your death trap alone. But I'm posting Marston to watch this area overnight. If Sutton and the Winchester woman are anywhere near your property, we'll find them." "Suit yourself," Tom replied, audible relief in his voice despite his attempt to sound casual. "But you're wasting your time. They're long gone from these parts, if you ask me." The torchlight receded from the entrance, and the sounds of men moving away gradually faded. Finn and Willow remained frozen in place, scarcely daring to believe their narrow escape. Only when silence had reigned for several minutes did Finn risk striking a match to relight the lantern, keeping the flame at its lowest setting to minimize any light that might escape the entrance. "That was too close," Willow whispered, her face pale in the dim light. Finn nodded grimly. "And now they've posted a guard. We're trapped here, at least until morning." "What do we do?" "Wait," he replied, though the word tasted bitter. Waiting meant another day of Blackstone's lies going unchallenged, another day of their names being dragged through the mud. "Tom will find a way to get word to us when it's safe." They settled back onto their makeshift bed, extinguishing the lantern again to eliminate any risk of light being spotted. In the complete darkness of the mine, with only the faint sound of dripping water from the spring and their own quiet breathing, time seemed to lose all meaning. Willow curled against Finn's side, drawing comfort from his warmth. "Tell me more about your ranch," she whispered. "What's it like in the spring?" Understanding her need for distraction, Finn began to describe the land. He loved the wildflowers that carpeted the meadows in April, the new calves on wobbly legs following their mothers, the way the mountains looked with their peaks still snow-capped while green crept up their flanks. "There's this one spot up on the eastern ridge," he murmured, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "When the sun rises, it catches the dew on the grass just right, making everything sparkle like diamonds. First time I saw it, I thought it must be what heaven looks like." "It sounds beautiful," she said softly. "It is." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to show it to you someday." Before she could respond, a faint scratching sound came from the mine entrance, followed by the softest of whispers. "Finn, Willow, are you there?" They froze, listening intently. It wasn't Tom's voice. "It's me, Samuel," came the whisper again. "Pa sent me. The deputy's asleep at his post, but we don't have much time." Relief flooded through them as Finn quickly relit the lantern and they gathered their few belongings. At the narrow entrance, they found young Samuel Whitaker crouched in the darkness, his expression a mixture of excitement and fear at his clandestine mission. "Pa says you need to head north," he explained in hushed tones as they emerged. "Sheriff's men are watching all the trails east and south. There's a logging camp about 15 miles north where you can find shelter. They don't ask questions of strangers there. Luke's gone ahead to let them know you might be coming." "What about Marston?" Finn asked, nodding toward where the deputy presumably kept his watch. Samuel grinned. Pa may have offered him some very strong cider. He's snoring loud enough to wake bears. Sure enough, as they cautiously made their way through the trees, they could hear the rhythmic snoring of the sleeping lawman, slumped against a tree trunk with an empty jug beside him. "Your father's a good friend," Finn said to Samuel as they reached the edge of the Whitaker property, where two saddled horses waited, along with provisions secured to the saddles. "He says the same about you," the boy replied. "Said some fights are worth having, even when they're not yours to start with." They said their goodbyes quickly, Willow embracing the boy and thanking him for his courage. Within minutes, they were riding north through the darkness, guided by the stars and Samuel's careful directions. "The logging camp is run by a man named Garrett," Samuel had told them. "Used to work for Blackstone until there was some dispute about payment. He'll have no love for the man or his allies." As they rode, a plan began to form in Finn's mind, not just to hide, but to finally take the offensive against Blackstone. If Pinkerton had confessed to Luke, perhaps he could be persuaded to confess to others. And if the logging camp owner had his own grievances against Blackstone, maybe they had found not just another hiding place, but potential allies. "We're not running forever," Finn said firmly as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. "It's time we stopped reacting and started acting. Blackstone thinks he's hunting us, but perhaps it's time we turn the tables." Willow studied his determined profile, hope kindling within her for the first time in days. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," he said with a grim smile, "that even the most powerful men have weaknesses. Blackstone seems to be pride and the belief that he's untouchable." He reached across to take her hand. "Let's prove him wrong." The journey to the logging camp took most of the day, their progress slowed by the need to remain vigilant and avoid the main trails where Holt's men might be patrolling. By late afternoon, the sound of axes and saws led them to a clearing where rough-hewn cabins clustered around a central yard. Men moved purposefully among stacks of freshly cut timber, while smoke rose from several cook fires. Their arrival drew immediate attention. Work paused as the loggers straightened from their tasks, watching the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard stepped forward, his weathered face unreadable as he assessed them. "You'd be Sutton and Winchester," he stated rather than asked, his deep voice carrying across the suddenly quiet yard. "Jenkins' boy said you might be coming." Finn dismounted, helping Willow down before facing the man who could only be Garrett, the camp boss. "We're grateful for any sanctuary you might offer," he said, keeping his voice steady and respectful. "And we understand if our presence puts you at risk." Garrett studied them for a long moment, then surprised them both with a brief but genuine smile. "Any enemy of Gregory Blackstone is welcome at my fire." He extended a calloused hand to Finn. "Thaddeus Garrett. Lost my own lumber mill to that snake 7 years ago when he manipulated timber prices to force me into debt." As they shook hands, Finn felt a surge of hope. Here was another victim of Blackstone's machinations and potentially a powerful ally. "The men here feel the same," Garrett continued, gesturing to the loggers who had gathered around. "Most worked for me before Blackstone took my mill. Now we contract independently to smaller operations that can't afford their own cutting crews." His expression hardened. "We're no outlaws, mind you. We obey the law, but we've no obligation to help a corrupt businessman use the sheriff to pursue his personal vendetta." Luke Jenkins emerged from one of the cabins, greeting them with evident relief. "You made it. When Samuel said you'd be coming north, I rode straight here to make arrangements." "Your family's taken considerable risk on our behalf," Willow said warmly. "We can never thank you enough." "Come," Garrett interrupted, gesturing toward the largest of the cabins. "You look dead on your feet. Rest, eat, and then we'll talk about what comes next." The hospitality of the logging camp was rough but genuine. They were given a small private cabin normally used by Garrett himself, who insisted on bunking with his foreman. A hot meal of venison stew and fresh bread restored their energy, and clean clothes borrowed from the few women who lived at the camp, as cooks and laundresses, allowed Willow to finally discard her torn and dirty dress. That evening, gathered around Garrett's table with Luke and several trusted loggers, they discussed strategies for exposing Blackstone's plot against Willow. "The key is Pinkerton," Finn insisted. "If we can get him to confess publicly, or at least to someone more official than Luke here, no offense, Luke." "None taken," the young man replied with a grin. "The problem," Garrett pointed out, "is that Pinkerton won't talk as long as he fears Blackstone more than he fears anything else." "Then we need to give him something more frightening to consider," Willow suggested, her mind working quickly. "What if he believed Blackstone was planning to use him as a scapegoat? Men like Blackstone always protect themselves first." "That could work," Luke said thoughtfully. "Pinkerton's not the bravest soul, and he was already grumbling about Blackstone not appreciating his special services enough. We'd need to get a message to him somehow," Finn mused. "Something convincing with details only an insider would know." Garrett leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard. "I might have just the person. Blackstone's housekeeper, Martha Wilkins, is my wife's cousin. She's been with him for years, sees and hears everything in that house. If anyone knows the details of Blackstone's private business, it's Martha." Hope surged through Finn and Willow. This was exactly the kind of inside information they needed. "Would she help us?" Willow asked cautiously. "She'd be risking her position." "Martha's no fool," Garrett replied. "She stays with Blackstone because the pay is good and jobs for women her age are scarce. But she's got no loyalty to the man. In fact, she's despised him ever since he refused to help her son when he got in trouble with some gambling debts. Boy ended up in prison when Blackstone could have easily settled the matter with a word to the right people." "If she could get information to Pinkerton," Finn said, excitement building in his voice, "make him believe Blackstone was planning to blame the entire scheme on him if things went wrong." "He might crack," Luke finished, "especially if he thought there was evidence that could implicate him while clearing Blackstone." The plan took shape over the next hour, a daring gambit that would require precise timing and a bit of luck, but one that might finally turn the tables on Gregory Blackstone. Garrett would send a trusted logger to Silverdale the following day with a message for Martha. If she agreed to help, she would plant seeds of doubt in Pinkerton's mind about Blackstone's loyalty. Meanwhile, Luke would spread rumors in town that the sheriff was considering a more thorough investigation of the missing money, prompted by questions from the territorial banking commissioner about irregular accounts at Blackstone's bank. "The beauty of it," Garrett explained, "is that there really is a banking commissioner visiting the county this month. Standard inspection, nothing to do with Blackstone specifically, but Pinkerton won't know that. And Martha can suggest that Blackstone has already prepared documents showing Pinkerton took the money for himself," Willow added, warming to the plan. "Which would explain why he was so insistent on framing me to divert attention from his own theft." Finn nodded slowly, impressed by her quick thinking. "It's a house of cards built on lies, but that seems fitting, given what Blackstone did to you." As the others continued refining details, Finn and Willow exchanged a look of cautious optimism. For the first time since fleeing Silverdale, they were moving from reactive to proactive, from hunted to hunters. Later that night, alone in their borrowed cabin, Willow voiced the concern that had been growing as the plan took shape. What if it doesn't work? What if Pinkerton remains loyal to Blackstone, or if Martha won't help us? Finn sat beside her on the narrow bed, taking her hands in his. Then we try something else, and if that fails, we try again. His voice was firm, his gaze steady. I meant what I said before, Willow. We're not running forever. One way or another, we'll clear your name. She studied his face in the lamplight, the determination in his blue eyes, the strength in his jawline, the unwavering resolve that had characterized his every action since the moment he'd ridden after her on that dusty road out of Silverdale. Why are you so certain? She whispered. How can you have such faith when everything seems stacked against us? A small smile touched his lips. Because I believe in you, in us. He reached up to cup her cheek gently. And because I've seen enough of life to know that the truth has a way of coming to light eventually. Our job is just to help it along a bit. His confidence was contagious, warming her from within. Impulsively, she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that spoke volumes about her own growing feelings, When they parted, slightly breathless, Finn's eyes held a question. "What was that for?" "For believing in me when no one else would," she replied softly. "For risking everything to stand by my side. For being the kind of man I thought only existed in books." He smiled, a tender expression that transformed his whole face. "If I'm a character from a book, then you've certainly written quite an adventure for us." "Not finished writing yet," she countered, returning his smile. "I'm hoping for a happy ending." "As am I," he murmured, drawing her close once more. "As am I." The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity as their plan was set in motion. Garrett's logger returned from Silverdale with word that Martha was indeed willing to help, having harbored her own resentment toward Blackstone for years. Luke Jenkins, who was less recognizable in town than Finn, made careful, discreet inquiries about the banking commissioner's visit and ensured that rumors of a pending investigation reached the right ears. On the morning of the 4th day, a rider arrived at the logging camp with news that sent a ripple of excitement through everyone involved in the plan. "Pinkerton's cracked," the man announced as they gathered in Garrett's cabin. "He went to Sheriff Holt last night, demanding protection in exchange for information about Blackstone's criminal activities." Willow gasped, her hand finding Finn's as hope surged through her. "He confessed. About the money," the rider nodded, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "Told Holt everything. How Blackstone ordered him to plant the money in your room, how he stole one of your handkerchiefs from your desk at the schoolhouse to wrap it in. Even admitted it wasn't the first time Blackstone had used him to frame someone who'd crossed him. And Holt believed him." Finn asked, scarcely daring to hope it could be so simple. "Holt's no fool," the man replied. "He's known for years that Blackstone plays loose with the law, but there was never enough proof to act on. Now he's got a sworn statement from Blackstone's right-hand man." He grinned broadly. "And it gets better. When Holt went to arrest Blackstone this morning, they found him attempting to flee town with a satchel full of cash from the bank. Seems your rumors about the banking commissioner spooked him proper." Garrett let out a whoop of triumph, clapping Finn on the shoulder. "By God, it worked. Your plan actually worked." Finn turned to Willow, whose eyes shimmered with unshed tears of relief and vindication. "It's over," he said softly. "Your name is cleared." She shook her head, still processing the news. "I can hardly believe it, after everything that's happened." "There's more," the rider interjected. "Sheriff Holt sent me specifically to find you too. He's officially withdrawn all charges against you, Miss Winchester, and he extends his personal apologies for his role in the injustice done to you." He turned to Finn. "To both of you." It was almost too much to absorb at once. After days of hiding, running, and desperate planning, victory had come with startling swiftness. Blackstone's carefully constructed web of power and intimidation had unraveled the moment one key thread Pinkerton's loyalty was pulled. "When can we return to town?" Finn asked, already thinking of his ranch, his responsibilities, the life that had been on hold since that fateful day. "Anytime you wish," came the reply, though Holt suggested you might want to wait until tomorrow. "Feelings are running high in town as news of Blackstone's crime spreads. He thought you might prefer to return when things have settled a bit." "Wise advice," Garrett agreed. "Stay one more night here. Return to Silverdale with your heads held high in the morning." The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulations and relief. Word spread quickly through the logging camp, and by evening, an impromptu celebration was underway, a simple affair of good food, home-brewed beer, and heartfelt toasts to justice prevailing. As the festivities continued around them, Finn and Willow slipped away to the quiet darkness beyond the cabins. The night was clear, stars strewn across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, the mountains a darker shadow against the horizon. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and find this was all a dream," Willow admitted, gazing up at the vast expanse above them. "That I'm still hiding in that mine, or worse, being marched out of town in disgrace." Finn took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "It's real. You're free, your name cleared. You can return to your teaching, to your life in Silverdale." She turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful in the starlight. "But will it ever be the same? Those people were so quick to believe the worst of me to cast me out." "Not all of them," Finn reminded her gently. And those who were wrong will have to live with that knowledge. Some will apologize, some won't, but you'll walk back into town with the truth on your side. And you, she asked softly, will you return to your ranch as if nothing happened? He considered the question, aware of the deeper meaning behind it. So much had changed between them in these tumultuous days, feelings acknowledged, bonds forged in the crucible of shared adversity. I'll return to my land, he said slowly. It's still my home, my father's legacy. But nothing will be the same, Willow. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Not for me, not after these days with you. The vulnerability in his expression, so rare in this strong, steady man, touched something deep within her. What are you saying, Finn? He took a deep breath, gathering courage for words that had been building since that first moment he'd helped her onto his horse outside Silverdale. I'm saying that somewhere between that dusty road and this starlit night, I fell in love with you, Willow Winchester. I'm saying that whatever comes next, I don't want to face it without you by my side. His voice grew softer, more intense. I'm saying that if you'll have me, I want to court you properly, as a man courts the woman he hopes to marry someday. Tears welled in her eyes, catching the starlight like tiny gems. I think, she whispered, that somewhere along the same journey, I fell in love with you too, Finnegan Sutton. His smile was brilliant even in the darkness as he drew her close. Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, a declaration of everything words had left unspoken between them. When they finally parted, Willow rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. So what happens now? She asked. Do we go back to Silverdale and pretend none of this happened? Return to being the rancher and the schoolteacher who barely spoke to each other in town? Finn chuckled softly, the sound rumbling beneath her ear. I don't think I could manage that pretense even if I wanted to. No, I intend to court you quite openly, Miss Winchester. Sunday dinners, escorting you to church socials, bringing flowers to your boarding house, the whole traditional courtship. She leaned back to look up at him, a teasing light in her eyes despite the emotion of the moment. How very proper, Mr. Sutton, and what will the good people of Silverdale think of that? They'll think that I'm the luckiest man in Montana territory, he replied without hesitation. And they'd be right. The journey back to Silverdale the next day was vastly different from their flight a week earlier. They rode side by side now, on horses borrowed from Garrett, with Luke Jenkins accompanying them as both guide and friend. The weather was fine, the mountain air crisp and invigorating, and the knowledge of their vindication lightened each mile. As they crested the final ridge overlooking Silverdale, they paused to take in the view. The town lay peaceful in the valley below, smoke rising from chimneys, the church steeple gleaming white in the sunshine. Ready? Finn asked, reaching across to take Willow's hand. She nodded, drawing strength from his touch. As ready as I'll ever be. They rode down the main street at midday, when the town was at its busiest. Heads turned as they passed, conversations halting mid-sentence as recognition dawned. Some faces showed shame or embarrassment, others relief. A few even broke into welcoming smiles. Outside the sheriff's office, they dismounted. Holt himself came to the door to greet them, his weathered face solemn as he removed his hat in a gesture of respect. Miss Winchester. Mr. Sutton, he said formally. I want to extend my official apologies for the grave injustice done to you both. Mr. Blackstone has been charged with multiple counts of fraud, bribery, and obstruction of justice, based on Mr. Pinkerton's testimony and evidence discovered at the bank. And my name, my reputation, Willow asked, her voice steady despite the emotions churning within her. Fully cleared, Holt assured her. I've posted notices to that effect around town, and Reverend Clark made an announcement at services yesterday. The school board has unanimously voted to reinstate you as teacher, with a formal apology and back pay for the time you've been away. He hesitated, then added gruffly, for what it's worth, I'm personally sorry for my part in this. I should have questioned Blackstone's evidence more carefully. Willow nodded, accepting his apology with quiet dignity. Thank you, Sheriff. I hope we can all move forward now. From there, they made their way to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, where the elderly proprietress flung open the door and enveloped Willow in a tearful embrace. My dear girl, I knew you couldn't have done what they claimed, she exclaimed, drawing Willow inside. Your room is just as you left it. I wouldn't let anyone else take it, no matter what the sheriff said. As Finn waited in the parlor while Willow went upstairs to refresh herself, Mrs. Holloway fixed him with a knowing look. So, she said with a hint of a smile, I see you finally found the courage to speak up. Madam, Finn questioned, though he suspected he knew what she meant. Oh, don't play innocent with me, young man. I've seen how you've looked at our Miss Winchester these past 2 years. Always finding reasons to pass by the schoolhouse, attending every school function though you have no children. Her expression softened. It took quite a crisis to push you into action, but I'm glad you finally declared yourself. Finn felt a blush creep up his neck, uncomfortable with how transparent his feelings had apparently been to the observant older woman. Yes, well, better late than never, I suppose. Indeed, she agreed with a satisfied nod. She's a special one, our Willow. Deserves a man who'll stand by her through thick and thin. Seems you've proven yourself on that count. When Willow reappeared, looking much more herself in a fresh blue dress, her hair neatly arranged, Mrs. Holloway insisted they stay for tea. News of their return had spread quickly, and before long, visitors began arriving. Reverend Clark with his official welcome back. Several parents of Willow's students bearing small gifts and apologies. Even Doc Perkins stopped by to express his support. Through it all, Finn remained by Willow's side, a steady presence as she navigated the emotional waters of her return. The way he hovered protectively near her, the occasional touch of his hand at her elbow or small of her back, did not go unnoticed by the townspeople. Whispers and speculative glances followed them, but for once, the gossip was kindly meant. By late afternoon, Finn excused himself to check on his ranch, promising to return in time to escort Willow to dinner at the hotel, her first public appearance back in town society. Are you sure you're ready for this? He asked as they stood on the boarding house porch. We could dine privately if you prefer. Willow shook her head, determination in her eyes. No, I won't hide or skulk about. I've done nothing wrong, and I want everyone to see that I hold my head high. He smiled, admiration clear in his gaze. You're remarkable, you know that. Most people would be bitter or afraid after what you've been through. Oh, there's some bitterness, she admitted with a wry twist of her lips. And a fair bit of anger too, but I won't let it consume me. That would be giving Blackstone a power over my life that he doesn't deserve. Finn's expression grew serious. Willow, there's something I need to ask you. Yes, he took her hands in his gaze direct and earnest. I meant every word I said last night. I love you, and I want to court you properly. But after everything that's happened, the scandal, our time alone together, the gossip that's sure to follow, I want to be sure this is truly what you want. Your reputation, she stopped him with a finger to his lips. My reputation was already destroyed once by lies and survived. I think it can withstand a little truth. Her eyes softened with emotion. The truth being that I love you, Finnegan Sutton, and I don't care who knows it. Relief and joy washed over his features. In that case, Miss Winchester, may I have the honor of escorting you to dinner this evening, she curtsied playfully. You may indeed, Mr. Sutton. I shall look forward to it most eagerly. Their laughter, bright and genuine, drifted across the porch as he mounted his horse and rode toward his ranch, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The months that followed saw Willow and Finn's relationship blossom under the approving eyes of Silverdale. True to his word, Finn courted her with all the traditional attentions: Sunday dinners, flowers delivered to her classroom, escort to church and social functions. Her return to teaching was met with enthusiasm from her students and most parents. The unfortunate episode with Blackstone gradually fading from daily conversation as life in the small town returned to normal. Gregory Blackstone himself was tried and convicted of multiple charges, sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison. His bank was taken over by a consortium of businessmen from Helena, who installed a fair-minded manager recommended by the banking commissioner. Pinkerton received a lighter sentence in exchange for his testimony, and was last heard to be heading east after his release, eager to put Montana far behind him. 6 months to the day after their return to Silverdale, Finn took Willow on a special ride to his ranch, to the eastern ridge he had described during their night hiding in the mine. The October morning was crisp, the aspens aflame with gold and orange against the evergreen backdrop of pines. As the sun crested the horizon, bathing the valley in golden light that made the dew-covered grass sparkle just as he had described, Finn dropped to one knee before her. "I promised to show you this place," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Because it's always been the most beautiful sight I know." He looked up at her, love shining in his blue eyes. "Until I met you." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box containing a delicate gold band set with a single perfect diamond that caught the morning light like a tiny star. "Willow Winchester, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of sharing this land, this life, all my tomorrows?" Tears of joy welled in her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed. "Oh, Finn, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to take her in his arms, their kiss sealed a journey that had begun in adversity and blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. They were married the following spring in Silverdale's white-steepled church, with Tom and Sarah Whitaker, Luke and Matthew Jenkins, Thaddeus Garrett, and many others who had helped them in their time of need among the guests. Mrs. Holloway wept openly from her place of honor in the front pew, while Reverend Clark beamed as he pronounced them husband and wife. The reception was held at Finn's ranch, now their ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwoods beside the creek, lanterns hanging from branches to illuminate the celebration as day faded into evening. There was music and dancing, laughter and a few happy tears, as the community came together to celebrate not just a marriage but the triumph of truth and justice over lies and corruption. As twilight deepened and the stars began to appear overhead, Finn led his bride away from the festivities to a quiet spot by the creek, where they could have a moment alone amidst the joy of the day. "Happy, Mrs. Sutton?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they stood beneath the starlit sky. Willow leaned back against his chest, contentment radiating from her like warmth from a hearth. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." She turned in his embrace to face him. "If someone had told me a year ago, when I was being dragged from town in shame, that I would end up here vindicated, respected, and married to the most wonderful man in Montana territory, I would have thought them mad. And if someone had told me that watching you face that injustice with such courage would finally give me the push I needed to declare my feelings," Finn replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "I might have considered it divine intervention." "Perhaps it was," she mused, her eyes reflecting the stars above. "Perhaps all of it, the accusations, the flight, even Blackstone's plot was leading us here to this moment." Finn smiled, drawing her closer. "Then I'm grateful for every step of the journey, difficult as some parts were. Because they brought me to you." As their lips met in a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership, the sounds of celebration drifted from the distant gathering music and laughter, the voices of friends and family who had shared in their trials and now shared in their joy. 5 years later, the Sutton Ranch had prospered and grown. Under Finn's careful management and Willow's organizational skills, they had expanded their holdings and improved their breeding stock, gaining a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far away as Chicago. Willow had continued teaching for a year after their marriage before the arrival of their first child, a daughter they named Sarah Eleanor, after both their mothers. A son, Thomas James, followed 2 years later, and now Willow was expecting their third child as winter approached once more. On a crisp November afternoon, with snow dusting the distant mountains, Finn returned from checking fence lines to find his wife on the porch of their expanded home, wrapped in a shawl against the chill as she watched their children playing in the yard. Sarah, now 4, was instructing her 2-year-old brother in the serious business of building a snow fort, her blonde hair so like her mother's escaping from beneath her woolen cap. Finn dismounted, handing his horse to the ranch hand who came to meet him, and climbed the steps to join his wife. At 5 months along, Willow's pregnancy was clearly visible beneath her warm dress, and Finn placed a gentle hand on the curve of her belly as he kissed her in greeting. "Everything all right out there?" she asked, leaning into his embrace. "All secure for winter," he confirmed, his attention drawn to their playing children. "And how are things here? Has Tom been behaving himself?" Willow laughed, a sound that still warmed him from within even after years of marriage. "As well as any 2-year-old boy with his father's adventurous spirit can behave. He tried to climb into the hay loft again when Miguel wasn't looking." Finn groaned good-naturedly. "That boy will be the death of me. I wasn't half so bold at his age." "I doubt that very much," she teased, her green eyes dancing with mirth. "I seem to recall stories from your mother about a certain young Finnegan who had to be rescued from the top of a windmill at the tender age of 3. He chuckled, conceding the point. "Fair enough. Perhaps he comes by it honestly." They stood together watching their children play, content in the life they had built from the ashes of scandal and injustice. The ranch had become everything Finn had dreamed, and more, not just a successful business, but a true home, filled with love and laughter and the patter of small feet. Willow still corresponded regularly with Tom and Sarah Whitaker, who had become like family to them. Luke Jenkins now managed the sawmill in Riverbend, having worked his way up from the cutting crew, while his brother Matthew had gone east to study engineering. Even Thaddeus Garrett visited occasionally, his booming laugh filling their home as he regaled the children with tales of life in the logging camps. Silverdale itself had changed too. With Blackstone's influence removed, the town had developed in healthier ways, more democratic, less dominated by any single interest. Finn had been elected to the town council the previous year, using his position to advocate for fair banking practices and support for small homesteaders. Willow, though no longer teaching formally, had established a small library in town, gathering donations of books and hosting reading groups for children and adults alike. "I had a letter from Mrs. Holloway today," Willow said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "She's thinking of retiring, says her arthritis makes it too difficult to manage the boarding house anymore." Finn nodded thoughtfully. "She must be approaching 70 now. Does she have family to go to?" "None nearby. That's partly why I wanted to talk to you." She turned to face him, a familiar light in her eyes that told him she had been formulating a plan. "I was thinking we might offer to buy the boarding house, keep it running. It's an institution in town, and with the railroad coming next year, Silverdale will need accommodations for travelers." He raised an eyebrow, though he was not entirely surprised by the suggestion. Willow's business acumen had proven invaluable to the ranch's success, and she often saw opportunities others missed, and who would run it. "You're rather occupied these days," he pointed out, his hand returning to her rounded belly. "Maria Carson is looking for work since her husband passed," Willow replied promptly, having clearly thought this through. "She's practical, trustworthy, and needs the income. She could manage the day-to-day operations, and I could oversee the books and larger decisions." Finn pretended to consider the idea seriously, though in truth, he had already decided to support whatever plan she had conceived. Her intelligence and foresight had never steered them wrong. "It's a sound investment," he agreed after a moment, "and it would ensure Mrs. Holloway is taken care of in her retirement." He smiled, unable to maintain the pretense of deliberation any longer. "You've already discussed this with Maria, haven't you?" Willow had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I may have mentioned the possibility, hypothetically, of course," he laughed, pulling her close again. "Of course, well, if Maria is interested and the numbers make sense, I think it's an excellent idea." Her smile was brilliant as she reached up to kiss him. "Thank you, I knew you'd understand." "I've learned to trust your instincts," he said simply. "They've served us well." As the sun began to set, painting the snow-dusted landscape in hues of gold and rose, they called the children in for supper. The warmth and light of their home beckoned, a sanctuary built on love and perseverance, on standing together against adversity. Later that evening, with the children tucked into bed and the house quiet save for the crackling of the fire in the hearth, Finn and Willow sat together in the study, a room they had added to the original ranch house that now served as both office and personal retreat. "Do you ever think about that day?" Willow asked softly, her hands busy with knitting a small blanket for the coming baby. When they forced me to leave town, Finn looked up from the ranch accounts he had been reviewing, his expression growing serious. Sometimes. Less often now than in the early years. I was thinking about it today after Mrs. Holloway's letter arrived, she admitted. How strange life is, how one moment of great injustice led to so much happiness. He set aside his papers, moving to sit beside her on the small sofa. If Blackstone hadn't plotted against you, I might never have found the courage to tell you how I felt. Might have gone on watching you from afar, too hesitant to speak. And I might never have seen the true heart of the quiet rancher who always tipped his hat so politely when we passed on the street, she added with a smile, setting down her knitting to take his hand. So much pain and fear in those days, yet they led us here, to this life we've built together. Finn lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm as he had done that night on the Whittakers' porch, when they had first acknowledged their feelings. I'd follow you into banishment again in a heartbeat, Willow Sutton, he said softly, though I'm grateful we found our way home instead. This is home, she replied, her free hand moving to rest on her belly where their third child grew. Wherever we are together with our children, building our future, that's home. As the fire burned low and the night deepened around their snug house, they remained together, talking softly of plans and dreams, of children and possibilities, of a future built on the solid foundation of a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for the trial. Outside, snow began to fall gently, adding fresh white to the landscape that surrounded the Sutton ranch. But inside, all was warmth and light and love, a testament to the truth that sometimes the most difficult journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations.